My family doctor betrayed my confidentiality. Then the medical board president called my private line. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah Chen had been staring at her laptop screen for hours, trying to focus on her graduate thesis about healthcare ethics, when her personal cell phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. Miss Chen? This is Dr. Margaret Whitfield, president of the California Medical Board. I believe we need to talk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that voice from news interviews, medical conferences, the woman who held the power to make or break medical careers across the state. But how did she have Sarah's private number, and why was she calling so late? I'm sorry, who is this again? Sarah managed, though she'd heard perfectly the first time. I think you know exactly who I am. Dr. Whitfield's voice was crisp, professional, but with an undertone that made Sarah's skin crawl. And I think you know why I'm calling. Your recent complaint against Dr. Richards has caused quite a stir. We should discuss how to handle the situation before it gets out of hand. Sarah's hands began to shake. 3 weeks ago, she had filed a confidential complaint with the medical board about her family physician, Dr. James Richards, who had violated patient privacy laws by sharing her medical information with her parents. Information she had specifically requested remain confidential. Information that could destroy her life if it became public. How did you get this number? Sarah whispered. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Miss Chen, when you're dealing with the medical board, privacy is a privilege, not a right. I suggest we meet tomorrow at 2 p.m., Riverside Cafe on 5th Street. Come alone and let's see if we can resolve this quietly. The line went dead. Sarah Chen had always trusted doctors. Growing up in a household where her father was a pharmaceutical executive and her mother was a nurse practitioner, medical professionals were revered. Their word was law, and questioning their judgment was tantamount to blasphemy. At 24, Sarah was pursuing her master's degree in bioethics at UC San Francisco, preparing for what she hoped would be a career in healthcare advocacy. She believed in the system, in the oath doctors took, in the sacred trust between patient and physician. That belief began to crumble on a warm September morning when she walked into Dr. James Richards' office for what should have been a routine appointment. Dr. Richards had been her family physician since she was 16. A kind, grandfatherly figure with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle bedside manner, he had guided her through the awkward years of adolescence, health concerns, and the transition into young adulthood. Her parents trusted him implicitly, often consulting with him about family health decisions even when Sarah was present. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been seeing Dr. Richards privately for the past 6 months, paying out of pocket to avoid using her parents' insurance, specifically to maintain confidentiality about a medical situation she wasn't ready to share with her family. The issue began in March, when Sarah started experiencing severe anxiety attacks, insomnia, and what she later learned were symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The trigger had been a sexual assault that occurred during her junior year of college, an incident she had never reported and had told no one about. The perpetrator was the son of one of her father's business associates, someone her family knew and respected. After months of struggling alone, Sarah finally decided to seek help. She chose Dr. Richards not just because of their established relationship, but because she knew he understood the importance of doctor-patient confidentiality. During their first session about her mental health, she had been explicit about her need for privacy. Dr. Richards had said, sitting nervously in the familiar examination room, "What I'm about to share with you needs to stay completely confidential. My parents cannot know about this. Can you promise me that?" Dr. Richards had nodded solemnly, his expression understanding and professional. "Sarah, you're 24 years old. You're an adult, and you have every right to medical privacy. What we discuss here is protected by doctor-patient privilege. Nothing leaves this room without your explicit consent. That conversation had taken place in March. By September, Sarah was making good progress. Dr. Richards had referred her to a trauma specialist, prescribed medication for her anxiety, and provided the support system she desperately needed. She was beginning to heal, to rebuild her sense of safety and trust. Then everything fell apart. Sarah arrived for her regular monthly appointment on September 15th, expecting the usual check-in about her medication and therapy progress. Instead, she found Dr. Richards looking uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes as she settled into the chair across from his desk. "Sarah," he began, his voice lacking its usual warmth, "we need to discuss something important. Your parents have been asking questions about your recent visits here. They're concerned about your mental health, and they want to be involved in your treatment." Sarah's heart rate immediately spiked. "What do you mean they've been asking questions? What did you tell them?" Dr. Richards shifted in his chair, still not meeting her gaze. "They know you've been seeing me regularly, paying out of pocket. They're worried about you, Sarah. Your father mentioned that you've been distant, that your behavior has changed. They love you, and they just want to help." "That's not what I asked," Sarah said, her voice tight with growing panic. "What exactly did you tell them about why I've been coming here?" There was a long pause. When Dr. Richards finally looked at her, Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Guilt, regret, and something else that looked almost like pity. "I may have mentioned that you've been dealing with some trauma-related issues," he said quietly. "Nothing specific, just that you needed support working through some difficult experiences from your past." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah gripped the arms of her chair, struggling to process what she was hearing. "You told them about my trauma after I specifically asked you not to share anything with my parents? Sarah, please understand. Did you tell them about the assault?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. Dr. Richards looked stricken. "I didn't go into details, but your father was very persistent. He mentioned knowing about some incident from college, something involving the Morrison family. He said they were concerned about potential legal implications if word got out." Sarah felt like she was going to vomit. The Morrison family. David Morrison, who had assaulted her at a party 2 years ago. David Morrison, whose father was one of her dad's biggest business partners. David Morrison, who her father had specifically warned her never to make trouble with after she had come home upset from that party, though she had never told him what actually happened. "How much do they know?" she managed to ask. "They know you've been struggling with PTSD related to an incident involving someone they know. They know you've been prescribed anti-anxiety medication and are seeing a therapist. And? They know I've been documenting everything in your medical file, including your statements about not wanting to pursue legal action because you were afraid it would damage your family's business relationships." Sarah stared at him in horror. Every private thought, every vulnerable moment, every piece of information she had shared in confidence had been turned into ammunition that could be used against her. Her parents now knew not just about the assault, but about her reasons for staying silent, her fears about family loyalty versus personal justice, her complicated...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
feelings about protecting the family business. "Why?" she asked, tears beginning to fall. "Why would you do this to me?" Dr. Richards finally met her eyes fully. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but you have to understand the position I'm in. Your father, he's very influential in this community. He sits on the hospital board where I have privileges. He has connections throughout the medical community that could affect my practice, my reputation, my ability to provide for my own family." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her trust, her trauma, her healing journey, all of it had been sacrificed for her doctor's career advancement and financial security. "He threatened you," she said, not really a question. "He didn't have to threaten directly," Dr. Richards replied, "but he made it very clear that my cooperation in his daughter's treatment would be remembered, and that my lack of cooperation would also be remembered." Sarah stood on shaking legs. I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone else. I came to you for help, and you sold me out to save your own skin. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Sarah's voice was gaining strength, fueled by a rage she didn't know she possessed. You violated your oath. You violated the law. You violated me. Dr. Richards looked genuinely distressed. Sarah, please sit down. Let's work through this. Your parents love you. They want to help. Maybe this is actually a good thing, having their support as you heal. Their support? She laughed bitterly. Do you know what my father told me when I came home, upset from that party 2 years ago? He said, whatever happened, we don't make waves with the Morrison family. They're too important to our business. He didn't even ask what happened. He just assumed I was being dramatic and told me to get over it. She moved toward the door, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal that filled the small office. And now, thanks to you, he knows I was raped by his business partner's son, and he knows I've been keeping it secret specifically because I was afraid he'd choose money over my justice. Do you think he's going to suddenly become the supportive father I needed 2 years ago? Or do you think he's going to find new ways to make sure I stay quiet? Dr. Richards stood as well, reaching out as if to comfort her. Sarah, I know this is difficult, but don't touch me. She backed away from him. Don't ever touch me again, and don't ever contact me again. I'll be finding a new doctor. I hope you'll reconsider. The only thing I'm going to reconsider, Sarah said, her hand on the doorknob, is whether to report you to the medical board for violating patient confidentiality. Actually, no, I don't need to reconsider that. I'm absolutely going to report you. She left the office with Dr. Richards calling after her, his voice full of panic and regret that came far too late to matter. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. Sarah's hands shook so badly she had to pull over twice to compose herself. By the time she reached her apartment, she had made a decision. She was going to fight back. That evening, she spent hours researching patient rights, medical ethics violations, and the complaint process for the California Medical Board. She documented everything she could remember from her conversations with Dr. Richards, including direct quotes and dates. She gathered copies of her medical bills, her prescriptions, and any paperwork that proved the confidential nature of their doctor-patient relationship. 3 days later, she submitted a formal complaint to the medical board, detailing how Dr. Richards had violated her patient privacy by sharing confidential medical information with her parents without her consent, and how he had done so under pressure from her father's business connections. In her complaint, she wrote, Dr. Richards betrayed the fundamental trust that exists between patient and physician. He allowed external business pressures to override his ethical and legal obligations to protect patient confidentiality. His actions have caused severe emotional distress and have potentially endangered my safety. Exposing private trauma information to family members who have already demonstrated they prioritize business relationships over my well-being. She requested that the board investigate Dr. Richards for professional misconduct and consider appropriate disciplinary action, including possible suspension or revocation of his medical license. The response came faster than she expected. Within a week, she received a formal acknowledgement that her complaint was being reviewed and that an investigation would be initiated. The letter assured her that all complaint proceedings were strictly confidential and that she would be contacted if additional information was needed. For the first time since that horrible day in Dr. Richards' office, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The system was working. Justice might actually be possible. Then, her father called. Sarah, we need to talk. His voice was cold, controlled, the tone he used in business negotiations when someone had crossed a line. About what? She tried to keep her voice steady. About your visit to Dr. Richards last week. About your situation. and about some very concerning calls I've been receiving from colleagues in the medical community." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What calls?" "Calls informing me that my daughter has filed a vindictive complaint against a respected physician. Calls asking if our family is planning to create problems for Dr. Richards over what amounts to a family medical consultation. Calls that are very bad for business, Sarah." The implication was clear. Her confidential complaint to the medical board had somehow made its way back to her father's business network. The very people she had tried to protect her privacy from now knew she had filed the complaint. "How do you know about my complaint?" she asked. "Sarah, this is a small community. Medical professionals talk to each other. Board members have relationships with hospital administrators. Hospital administrators have relationships with pharmaceutical executives. Everyone knows everyone, and word travels fast when someone tries to destroy a good doctor's reputation." "I'm not trying to destroy anyone's reputation. I'm trying to hold him accountable for violating the law." "You're being naive," her father snapped. "Dr. Richards was looking out for our family's best interests. He was trying to help us help you. And now you've repaid his concern by potentially ruining his career." "His concern?" Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Dad, he violated patient confidentiality. He shared private medical information without my consent. That's illegal." "What's illegal is allowing trauma to make you paranoid and vindictive. What's illegal is destroying a good man's livelihood because you're too emotionally unstable to appreciate that people are trying to help you." The conversation continued for another painful 20 minutes, with her father alternating between expressions of concern for her mental health and threats about what her reckless behavior could mean for the family's business relationships. By the end, Sarah understood two things clearly. Her father had no intention of supporting her pursuit of justice, and somehow her supposedly confidential complaint had been leaked to exactly the people she had been trying to protect herself from. That night, she called the medical board's complaint hotline to report that her confidentiality as a complainant had been breached. She was told that such breaches were taken very seriously and that her concern would be forwarded to the appropriate investigators. 2 weeks passed with no further communication from the medical board. Then, 3 weeks after her initial complaint, her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. with that call from Dr. Margaret Whitfield. Now, sitting in her apartment after that disturbing conversation, Sarah tried to make sense of what was happening. The president of the medical board had her private cell phone number. She knew about Sarah's complaint in detail. She was suggesting a private meeting to resolve this quietly rather than through the official investigation process. Sarah spent the rest of the night researching Dr. Margaret Whitfield. What she found made her stomach sink. Dr. Whitfield had extensive connections throughout California's medical and pharmaceutical industries. She served on multiple boards, had business relationships with major healthcare corporations, and had a reputation for protecting established physicians from what she termed frivolous complaints. More disturbing, Sarah discovered that Dr. Whitfield had business connections to her father's pharmaceutical company through a consulting agreement that had been in place for over 5 years. The system Sarah had trusted to deliver justice was compromised from the very top. The woman who was supposed to be investigating her complaint was personally and financially connected to the very people who had caused her trauma in the first place. As dawn broke through her apartment windows, Sarah made another decision. She wasn't going to that meeting at Riverside Cafe. Instead, she was going to find another way to fight back. She was going to expose not just Dr. Richards' violation of her privacy, but the entire network of corruption that had allowed that violation to be covered up. She had no idea how dangerous that decision would prove to be, or how far the people in power would go to protect their interests. But she was about to find out that when you threaten the medical establishment's reputation and financial stability, they don't just try to silence you, they try to destroy you completely. The next morning brought a new level of harassment that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Her phone began ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from unknown numbers. When she answered the first few, she heard the same message each time. Automated surveys asking about her satisfaction with recent medical care and whether she had ever filed complaints against healthcare providers. By noon, she had received 17 such calls. Her email inbox filled with similar automated surveys, but also with more disturbing messages that appeared to be from legitimate medical organizations. The American Medical Association wanted to discuss her recent experiences with physician care. The California Hospital Association was conducting research on patient complaint patterns and wanted her to participate in a study. Each message requested detailed information about her medical history, her reasons for changing physicians, and her experiences with the complaint process. They all assured her that her participation was voluntary, but would be extremely valuable for improving healthcare quality. Sarah recognized these for what they were: fishing expeditions designed to gather information about her complaint and her vulnerabilities. Someone was coordinating a sophisticated harassment campaign designed to overwhelm her, intimidate her, and possibly trick her into providing information that could be used against her. She documented everything, taking screenshots of emails and recording the automated phone calls. If this was how the medical establishment planned to fight her complaint, she was going to make sure she had evidence of their tactics. That afternoon, instead of meeting Dr. Whitfield at the cafe, Sarah drove to the offices of the California Medical Board to attempt to speak with someone in person about the breach of confidentiality regarding her complaint. She was told that all complaint investigations were confidential and that she would need to schedule an appointment through proper channels. When she asked specifically about Dr. Whitfield's contact with her, the receptionist claimed no knowledge of any such contact and suggested that Sarah might be mistaken about receiving a call from the board president. Perhaps it was someone impersonating Dr. Whitfield, the receptionist suggested with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We get reports of scam calls like that sometimes. Sarah left the building feeling more isolated than ever. Not only was her complaint being buried, but now the board was denying that their own president had contacted her. They were gaslighting her, making her question her own perceptions and experiences.
That evening, she received a text message from an unknown number. "You missed our appointment today. That was unwise. Call me." It was followed by Dr. Whitfield's direct office number. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She could ignore it, but that would likely escalate whatever pressure campaign was being waged against her. She could report it as harassment, but who would she report it to? The very organization that Dr. Whitfield led? Finally, she decided to call, but this time she was going to record the conversation. "Dr. Whitfield's office, this is Janet." "This is Sarah Chen. Dr. Whitfield asked me to call." "Oh yes, Miss Chen. Dr. Whitfield is waiting for your call. Please hold." The hold music was classical, soothing, completely at odds with the anxiety coursing through Sarah's veins. When Dr. Whitfield came on the line, her voice was warmer than it had been during the late-night call, almost motherly. "Sarah, I'm so glad you called. I was worried when you didn't show up today. I hope you're feeling all right." "I'm fine. I just don't understand why the president of the medical board wants to meet with me privately about an active complaint investigation." "Oh, my dear, is that what you think this is about?" Dr. Whitfield's laugh was gentle, condescending. "Sarah, I'm not calling you as the board president. I'm calling you as someone who's concerned about your well-being. Your father and I have known each other for years through various professional connections. When I heard about your difficulties, I wanted to reach out personally to see if there was anything I could do to help." Sarah's mind raced. This was a masterful manipulation. By framing the contact as personal rather than professional, Dr. Whitfield was attempting to sidestep any ethical concerns about interfering with an active complaint investigation. "How exactly did you hear about my difficulties?" Sarah asked. "Sarah, the medical community is close-knit. When someone files a complaint against a respected physician, like Dr. Richards, People notice. People talk. And when that someone is the daughter of a prominent pharmaceutical executive, people pay attention. So, my complaint isn't confidential at all. Well, officially, of course it is. But unofficially, we all want to make sure you're getting the support you need during what must be a very difficult time. Trauma can make us see threats where none exist, make us lash out at people who are trying to help us. There it was. The implication that Sarah's complaint was the result of trauma-induced paranoia rather than legitimate violation of her rights. Dr. Whitfield, are you suggesting that I'm mentally unstable? Not at all, dear. I'm suggesting that you're hurting, and hurt people sometimes make decisions they later regret. Filing a complaint against Dr. Richards won't undo whatever happened to you in college. It won't bring you peace or healing, but it could destroy a good man's career and reputation. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Dr. Whitfield knew about the college incident. Knew enough details to reference it specifically. That information wasn't in Sarah's complaint. The only way Dr. Whitfield could know about it was through Dr. Richards or through Sarah's parents. How exactly did you hear about my difficulties? Sarah asked. Sarah, the medical community is close-knit. When someone files a complaint against a respected physician like Dr. Richards, people notice. People talk. And when that someone is the daughter of a prominent pharmaceutical executive, people pay attention. So my complaint isn't confidential at all. Well, officially, of course it is. But unofficially, we all want to make sure you're getting the support you need during what must be a very difficult time. Trauma can make us see threats where none exist, make us lash out at people who are trying to help us. The implications were crystal clear. If Sarah continued with her complaint, they would wage a campaign to destroy her credibility by exposing her trauma, questioning her mental stability, and painting her as a vindictive, unstable person with ulterior motives. And if I withdraw my complaint, then this all goes away. Dr. Richards continues his excellent care of patients, your family maintains its respected position in the community, and you get the help you need to heal from whatever's troubling you, without the stress of a prolonged legal battle that you can't win. Sarah took a deep breath. Dr. Whitfield, I need to ask you something directly. Are you speaking to me as a concerned family friend, or as the president of the medical board who has the power to influence the investigation of my complaint? Another pause, longer this time. When Dr. Whitfield spoke again, her voice had hardened. I'm speaking to you as someone who's trying to help you understand the reality of your situation. You can continue down this path, and I can't control what consequences that might have for you and your family, or you can make the smart choice and let this matter rest. I see. And what if I choose to continue? Then I suppose we'll all have to live with the results of that decision. Good evening, Sarah. I hope you'll think carefully about our conversation. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a mixture of fear and determination. They had just made their position clear: withdraw the complaint or face systematic destruction of her credibility, her privacy, and possibly her safety. But in trying to intimidate her, they had also revealed something crucial. They were scared. Scared enough to have the president of the medical board personally intervene. Scared enough to coordinate harassment campaigns and breach confidentiality protocols. That meant her complaint posed a real threat to them, which meant she was onto something bigger than just one doctor's privacy violation. As Sarah began planning her next move, she realized she was no longer just fighting for justice in her own case. She was fighting a system of corruption that protected powerful people at the expense of vulnerable patients. And she was just getting started. Sarah spent the following morning at the University of California, San Francisco Law Library, using her student access to research medical board corruption cases and whistleblower protection laws. What she discovered was both encouraging and terrifying.
There were precedents for patients successfully challenging medical board cover-ups, but the cases that made it to court often involved complainants who had endured years of legal battles, financial ruin, and personal attacks before achieving any semblance of justice. More disturbing were the cases that never made it to court. She found references in legal journals to patients whose complaints had simply disappeared from medical board records, whose allegations had been dismissed on procedural technicalities, and whose personal lives had been systematically destroyed through what appeared to be coordinated campaigns of harassment and defamation. As she printed copies of relevant cases and statutes, Sarah's phone buzzed with yet another automated survey call. This time, however, she answered it and stayed on the line to see where it led. After responding to several innocuous questions about healthcare satisfaction, the survey took a darker turn. Have you ever experienced mental health issues that might affect your perception of medical care? The automated voice asked. Have you ever filed false reports against authority figures? Have you ever been treated for conditions related to sexual trauma that might cause you to misinterpret normal medical consultations? Sarah hung up, her hands shaking with rage. They weren't just trying to intimidate her anymore. They were building a profile, gathering information that could be used to paint her as an unreliable witness with mental health issues that compromised her judgment. That afternoon, she received an unexpected email from someone named David Kowalski, who identified himself as an investigative journalist with the Sacramento Bee. The subject line read,
"Regarding medical board practices. Ms. Chen," the email began, "I've been investigating patterns of misconduct within the California Medical Board's complaint handling processes. Your name has come up in connection with a case involving Dr. James Richards. I'd like to speak with you about your experiences with the board's investigation procedures. I believe your story might be part of a larger pattern of corruption that deserves public attention." Sarah stared at the email for several minutes. It could be legitimate, a genuine journalist investigating the same corruption she had stumbled into, or it could be another trap, another attempt to gather information about her case and her vulnerabilities. She decided to research David Kowalski before responding. What she found was promising. He was indeed a journalist with the Sacramento Bee, specializing in healthcare and government accountability stories. His byline appeared on dozens of articles about medical licensing issues, pharmaceutical industry corruption, and patient rights violations. More importantly, 6 months earlier, he had published a series of articles about irregularities in medical board disciplinary proceedings, focusing on cases where complaints against well-connected physicians had been dismissed despite strong evidence of wrongdoing. Sarah crafted a careful response, agreeing to speak with Kowalski but insisting that their initial conversation be conducted through encrypted channels and that her identity be protected until she decided to go public with her story. 2 days later, they spoke via an encrypted video call. Kowalski appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who had spent years investigating corruption and abuse of power. His questions were precise, focused, and demonstrated a deep understanding of medical board procedures and politics. "Sarah," he said after she had outlined the basic facts of her case, "what you're describing fits a pattern I've been tracking for the past 2 years. The medical board has been systematically protecting physicians who have powerful connections, regardless of the severity or legitimacy of complaints against them." He shared his screen to show her a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. These are all cases where complaints were either dismissed without proper investigation or where complainants were harassed into withdrawing their complaints in exchange for quiet settlements. If you're willing to go on the record, your case could be the key to exposing this entire system. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Going public meant giving up any hope of resolving this quietly, but it also meant potentially protecting future patients from similar violations. What would going on the record involve? First, I'd need you to provide documented evidence of everything you've experienced. The harassment calls, the text messages from Dr. Whitfield, recordings of conversations if you have them, copies of your original complaint, and any responses from the board. Sarah nodded. She had been documenting everything meticulously. Second, I'd want to interview you extensively about the timeline of events, the specific statements made by Dr. Richards and Dr. Whitfield, and the connections between your family
And the medical establishment involved in your case. And third? Third, you'd need to be prepared for retaliation. Once this story goes public, they're going to try to destroy your credibility and your reputation. They'll dig into every aspect of your personal life looking for ammunition to use against you. They might even try to have you declared mentally incompetent or pursue legal action against you for defamation. Sarah thought about Dr. Whitfield's threats, about the coordinated harassment campaign, about her father's business relationships and his willingness to prioritize them over her well-being. "They're already doing most of that," she said finally. "At least if I go public, there might be some chance of stopping them from doing it to other people." Kowalski smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. But before we move forward, there's something else you should know. I've been investigating Dr. Whitfield's financial relationships, and what I've found suggests that your case is just the tip of the iceberg." He shared another document, this one showing a complex web of business relationships between Dr. Whitfield, various pharmaceutical companies, and medical institutions throughout California. Dr. Whitfield serves on the boards of 3 different healthcare corporations. She has consulting agreements with 5 pharmaceutical companies, including your father's firm. She owns significant stock in 2 medical device companies that have had complaints filed against their products. And she's married to the CEO of a major hospital chain that's been accused of covering up multiple malpractice incidents. Sarah studied the connections, beginning to understand the scope of the corruption she had stumbled into. Every decision she makes as board president potentially affects the financial interests of companies she's personally invested in, Kowalski continued. That's a massive conflict of interest, and it explains why legitimate complaints keep getting buried. How is this legal? Technically, she's supposed to recuse herself from cases where she has conflicts of interest, but since she controls the board's agenda and procedures, she can simply ensure that her conflicts are never officially recognized or documented. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was learning. Her complaint against Dr. Richards had revealed a systemic pattern of corruption that potentially affected thousands of patients and hundreds of physicians throughout the state. "What do you need from me to move forward with the story?" "Everything you've got. But more importantly, I need you to understand that once we publish this, there's no going back. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about the sexual assault she had endured, the betrayal by her family physician, the harassment from the medical board, and her father's prioritization of business relationships over her safety and well-being. She had already lost so much to powerful people who abuse their positions to protect their interests. "I'm prepared, but I want to do more than just tell my story. I want to help you expose the entire system." Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah worked closely with Kowalski to build an airtight case against Dr. Whitfield and the corrupt practices of the medical board. She provided detailed documentation of every aspect of her experience, submitted to multiple recorded interviews, and helped Kowalski contact other potential victims whose cases fit similar patterns. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining. Reliving the trauma of Dr. Richards' betrayal and the subsequent harassment campaign forced Sarah to confront feelings of powerlessness and violation that she had been working through in therapy. But it was also empowering. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt like she was taking meaningful action rather than simply reacting to attacks. She was transforming her victimization into advocacy, her silence into testimony, her isolation into solidarity with other patients who had been similarly wronged.
During this period, the harassment escalated significantly. The automated survey calls increased to as many as 30 per day. Sarah's personal information began appearing on dubious websites that claimed to expose frivolous medical malpractice claimants and unstable individuals who make false accusations against healthcare providers. Someone created fake social media profiles using her name and photo, posting content designed to make her appear unhinged and vindictive. The posts included rants about corrupt doctors and medical conspiracies, written in a style that was just believable enough to seem authentic, but extreme enough to damage her credibility. Her father called repeatedly, alternating between expressions of concern and threats about the consequences of her destructive behavior. During one particularly heated conversation, he made it clear that her pursuit of the complaint was affecting his business relationships. "Sarah, you need to understand what you're doing to our family," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My associates are asking questions about my ability to control my own household. They're wondering if I can be trusted to handle sensitive business matters when I can't even manage my own daughter's emotional problems." "This isn't about emotional problems, Dad. This is about a doctor violating the law and a medical board covering it up. It's about you destroying people's lives because you can't accept that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good of the family." "What greater good? Protecting the business interests of the man whose son raped me?" There was a long silence on the line. When her father spoke again, his voice was cold and final. "If you continue down this path, Sarah, you're going to find yourself completely on your own. No family support, no financial assistance, no help when the people you're attacking decide to fight back. Is your crusade really worth losing everything?" "I've already lost everything that mattered," Sarah replied. "The question is whether I'm going to let them destroy other people too." The call ended with her father hanging up, and Sarah realized that she had just severed her last connection to the family that had failed to protect her. 3 days later, Dr. Whitfield made another direct contact, this time through a certified letter delivered to Sarah's apartment. The letter was written on official medical board letterhead and was signed by Dr. Whitfield in her capacity as board president. "Dear Ms. Chen," it began, "it has come to the attention of the California Medical Board that you may be suffering from psychological distress that is affecting your ability to accurately assess the medical care you have received. Based on concerns raised by healthcare professionals familiar with your case, the board is prepared to arrange for a comprehensive psychological evaluation to determine your competency to participate in the complaint process." The letter went on to explain that failure to submit to the evaluation would result in the automatic dismissal of her complaint, and that the evaluation would be conducted by board-approved psychiatrists who would assess her mental stability, reliability as a witness, and potential underlying psychological conditions that might affect her perception of medical interactions. Sarah recognized the letter for what it was: a transparent attempt to have her declared mentally incompetent and discredited as a witness. The evaluation would undoubtedly be conducted by psychiatrists with connections to Dr. Whitfield, and the results would be used to paint her as an unreliable, mentally unstable individual whose complaint should be dismissed. She immediately scanned the letter and sent it to Kowalski, along with a message: "I think it's time to publish the story." Kowalski's response came within an hour. "Agreed. They're escalating because they know we're close to exposing them. I'll have the article ready for publication tomorrow morning. Are you prepared for the shitstorm that's about to hit?" Sarah looked around her small apartment, at the boxes of documentation she had
gathered, at the legal books she had been studying, at the evidence of systematic harassment that covered her desk. She thought about the other victims whose stories Kowalski had shared with her. Patients who had been silenced and discredited for challenging the medical establishment. "I'm ready," she replied. That evening, Sarah received a final call from Dr. Whitfield. This time, there was no pretense of concern or friendship in her voice. "Sarah, I understand you've been speaking with a certain journalist about your experiences with the medical board. I want you to know that we're prepared to pursue legal action against you for defamation, interference with business relationships, and making false statements to the press. Are you threatening me, Dr. Whitfield? I'm informing you of the consequences of your actions. You're about to accuse respected members of the medical community of serious misconduct based on nothing more than your paranoid misinterpretation of normal professional interactions. That's not journalism, it's character assassination. And what about your character assassination of me? What about the fake websites, the harassment calls, the attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent? I have no idea what you're talking about. If you're experiencing harassment, perhaps it's because people in the medical community are naturally concerned about false accusations being made against their colleagues. Sarah laughed bitterly. Dr. Whitfield, tomorrow morning the entire state is going to read about your corruption, your conflicts of interest, and your abuse of power. I hope your business relationships are worth more to you than your reputation, because you're about to lose both. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Sarah. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're actually destroying your own future. No medical school will accept you. No healthcare employer will hire you. No physician will treat you once word gets out about your vindictive behavior toward colleagues who tried to help you. Then I guess I'll have to find a new career path. Maybe investigative journalism. I seem to have a talent for uncovering corruption. The line went dead, and Sarah knew that she had just declared war on one of the most powerful institutions in the state's healthcare system. The next morning, the Sacramento Bee published Kowalski's exposé under the headline, "Medical Board President Accused of Systematic Cover-Up of Physician Misconduct." The article detailed Sarah's case in full, including recorded excerpts from her conversations with Dr. Whitfield, documentation of the harassment campaign, and evidence of Dr. Whitfield's extensive financial conflicts of interest with companies whose interests she was supposed to regulate. But the article went far beyond Sarah's individual case. Kowalski had uncovered 12 other instances where Dr. Whitfield had personally intervened to protect physicians with powerful connections, including cases involving sexual misconduct, prescription drug fraud, and patient deaths due to negligence. The story included interviews with 3 other patients who had been harassed into withdrawing their complaints, a former medical board investigator who detailed how cases were systematically buried, and financial records showing the extent of Dr. Whitfield's business relationships with companies whose interests she was supposed to regulate. Within hours of publication, the story was picked up by major news outlets throughout California. The Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and Associated Press all ran follow-up stories expanding on the allegations and calling for investigations into medical board practices. Sarah's phone began ringing immediately, but this time, the calls were different. Journalists from across the country wanted interviews. Patient advocacy groups wanted to offer support. Attorneys specializing in medical malpractice and government corruption wanted to discuss potential legal action. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she wasn't fighting alone. But the victory was short-lived. By noon, the counterattack had begun in earnest. A hastily convened press conference was held at the medical board's headquarters, where Dr. Whitfield appeared flanked by the board's legal counsel and several prominent physicians. Her statement was brief, but devastating. The allegations made in today's newspaper article are completely false and represent a coordinated attack on the integrity of California's medical licensing system, she began, her voice steady and authoritative. The individual making these accusations has a documented history of mental health issues and has been under psychiatric care for trauma-related disorders that affect her perception of reality. She held up what appeared to be medical records. These documents, provided with appropriate legal authorization, show a pattern of paranoid behavior, false accusations against authority figures, and an inability to distinguish between normal professional interactions and imagined persecution. The assembled reporters began asking questions, but Dr. Whitfield continued her statement without acknowledging them. The Sacramento Bee has chosen to publish the paranoid delusions of a mentally unstable individual rather than conducting proper journalistic due diligence. This represents a new low in irresponsible reporting and demonstrates why serious investigations should be left to appropriate regulatory authorities rather than sensationalist media outlets seeking to sell newspapers through manufactured scandals. Sarah watched the press conference from her apartment, feeling sick as she realized what was happening. Somehow, Dr. Whitfield had obtained copies of her medical records from her trauma therapy and was using them to publicly destroy her credibility. The records Dr. Whitfield was referencing were from her sessions with the trauma specialist Dr. Richards had referred her to. They contained detailed notes about her PTSD symptoms, her fears about family loyalty conflicts, and her struggles with trust and authority figures following her sexual assault. In the context of trauma therapy, these notes represented normal responses to severe trauma and documented her healing process. But presented selectively and out of context, they could be used to paint her as paranoid, unstable, and prone to making false accusations. The violation was staggering. Not only had Dr. Richards shared her confidential medical information with her parents without consent, but now that information was being used in a public forum to destroy her reputation and credibility. Sarah's phone rang. It was Kowalski. "I just watched the press conference," he said grimly. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. They're using your own medical records against you." "How is that legal? Those records are protected by HIPAA." "They're claiming they have legal authorization, probably through some emergency provision or court order. It doesn't matter if it's legitimate or not, the damage is done. Every news outlet in the state is going to run with this story now." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. "So what do we do?" "We fight back harder. This was a desperate move on their part, which means they're scared. The fact that they had to resort to violating your medical privacy to discredit you actually proves our point about their corruption." "But who's going to believe me now? They've just painted me as a paranoid mental patient whose accusations can't be trusted." "Some people will believe them," Kowalski acknowledged, "but others will see this for what it is, a powerful institution destroying a victim to protect itself. The question is whether you're willing to keep fighting, even when the odds are stacked against you." Sarah looked out her apartment window at the city below, thinking about all the patients who had been silenced by similar tactics, all the victims who had been discredited and destroyed for challenging powerful institutions. "I'm willing," she said, "but I need help. I can't fight this alone anymore." "You won't have to," Kowalski replied. "I've already been contacted by the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and 3 different law firms that specialize in whistleblower protection. Your story has resonated with people who fight institutional corruption for a living." Over the next 48 hours, Sarah's case became a cause célèbre for patient rights advocates, medical reform organizations, and civil liberties groups throughout the country. The fact that Dr. Whitfield had used Sarah's own therapy records to publicly attack her credibility had backfired spectacularly, generating outrage about medical privacy violations and systematic retaliation against complainants. Major medical organizations began distancing themselves from Dr. Whitfield's tactics, with the American Medical Association issuing a statement expressing concern about the apparent misuse of confidential patient information in response to legitimate complaints about physician conduct. 3 state legislators announced plans to introduce bills strengthening protections for patients who file complaints against healthcare providers, and the California Attorney General's office announced that it was opening an investigation into medical board practices. But the personal cost to Sarah continued to mount. Her graduate program placed her on administrative leave, pending investigation of her mental fitness to continue her studies. Her part-time job at a medical research clinic was terminated due to concerns about her stability and judgment. Most painfully, her father's business associates began pressuring him to publicly disown her, threatening to terminate contracts and partnerships if he didn't distance himself from her attack on the medical community. Sarah found herself effectively blacklisted from the healthcare industry she had planned to dedicate her life to.
isolated from her family, and facing mounting legal and financial pressures as Dr. Whitfield's allies pursued aggressive defamation lawsuits designed to bankrupt her and her supporters. But she also found something she hadn't expected: a community of advocates, survivors, and reformers who understood exactly what she was going through and were committed to supporting her fight for justice. The war was far from over, but for the first time since Dr. Richards had betrayed her trust, Sarah felt like she might actually have a chance to win. The turning point came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after Dr. Whitfield's devastating press conference, Sarah received a call from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a senior investigator with the California Attorney General's office who had been assigned to review medical board practices following the public outcry. "Miss Chen, I've been studying your case extensively, and I believe you should know that Dr. Whitfield may have made a critical error when she disclosed your medical records publicly," Dr. Vasquez explained during their first phone conversation. Sarah had been fielding dozens of calls from reporters, lawyers, and advocacy groups, but something in Dr. Vasquez's tone suggested this conversation would be different. What kind of error? The authorization she claimed to have for releasing your therapy records doesn't exist. We've reviewed every court order, every legal filing, every administrative decision related to your case. There is no legitimate legal basis for what she did at that press conference. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What does that mean? It means Dr. Whitfield violated federal HIPAA laws, state medical privacy statutes, and possibly committed perjury when she claimed to have proper authorization. More importantly, it means she's potentially committed felony violations in her attempt to discredit you. Dr. Vasquez continued, "The Attorney General's office is prepared to pursue criminal charges against Dr. Whitfield, but we need your cooperation as a witness. This won't be easy, and the medical establishment will continue trying to destroy your credibility, but we believe we can build a strong case." Sarah thought about everything she had endured, everything she had lost, and everything that was at stake for future patients who might face similar retaliation. "What do you need from me?" Over the following months, Sarah found herself at the center of the largest investigation into medical board corruption in California's history. Dr. Vasquez's team uncovered evidence that went far beyond Sarah's individual case, revealing a systematic
Pattern of abuse that had affected hundreds of patients and dozens of physicians over nearly a decade. The investigation revealed that Dr. Whitfield had been operating what amounted to a protection racket within the medical board. Physicians who had personal connections to her, who served on boards of companies she was invested in, or who worked for hospital systems she had financial relationships with, received favorable treatment when complaints were filed against them. Meanwhile, physicians who challenged her authority or competed with her business interests found themselves facing enhanced scrutiny, frivolous investigations, and professional sabotage designed to drive them out of practice. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed clear patterns of Dr. Whitfield's business interests aligning with her decision-making as board president. Email communications subpoenaed from the medical board revealed explicit discussions about protecting important physicians while targeting troublemakers for retaliation. Most damning of all were recorded conversations between Dr. Whitfield and various pharmaceutical executives, hospital administrators, and medical device company officials discussing specific complaint cases and the need to ensure appropriate outcomes that protected industry interests. Sarah's role in the investigation was crucial but exhausting. She spent countless hours providing testimony, reviewing documents, and helping investigators understand the tactics that had been used against her. The process required her to relive every aspect of her traumatic experience while facing ongoing attempts by Dr. Whitfield's legal team to discredit her. The defense strategy was predictable but vicious. Dr. Whitfield's attorneys painted Sarah as a mentally unstable individual who had manufactured an elaborate conspiracy theory to explain her own psychological problems. They argued that her sexual assault trauma had made her paranoid and prone to misinterpreting normal professional interactions as persecution.
They brought in psychiatric experts who testified that Sarah's PTSD symptoms could cause her to have false memories, to misinterpret benign communications as threats, and to believe that she was the victim of coordinated harassment when she was actually experiencing anxiety-induced paranoia. The cross-examination during Dr. Whitfield's criminal trial was brutal. For 3 days, Sarah faced aggressive questioning designed to break down her credibility and paint her as an unreliable witness whose mental health issues compromised her ability to accurately perceive reality. Ms. Chen, Dr. Whitfield's lead attorney, began during the most intense day of cross-examination. Isn't it true that you have a documented history of making false accusations against authority figures? No, that's not true. But your therapy records indicate that you have trust issues with authority figures stemming from your assault trauma, correct? Having trust issues isn't the same as making false accusations. And isn't it true that your therapist noted concerns about your tendency to interpret normal interactions as threatening or hostile? Sarah's attorney objected, but the damage was being done. The defense was systematically using her own healing process against her, twisting her therapist's notes about normal trauma responses into evidence of mental instability. Ms. Chen, when Dr. Richards shared information about your condition with your parents, isn't it possible that he was simply trying to ensure you received appropriate family support during your recovery? He violated my explicit request for confidentiality. But given your mental state at the time, is it possible that you misunderstood the nature of the confidentiality agreement? I was completely clear about my request and he acknowledged it. But you were under significant psychological stress, weren't you? Stress that could affect your memory and perception of conversations. The questioning continued for hours, with Dr. Whitfield's attorney systematically attacking every aspect of Sarah's credibility, her memory, her
Health, and her motivations. They portrayed her as a vindictive, unstable individual who had destroyed the careers of respected medical professionals based on paranoid delusions. But Sarah had spent months preparing for this moment. She had worked with Dr. Vasquez's team to review every piece of evidence, every recording, every document that supported her case. When the defense attorneys claimed she had misunderstood or misremembered conversations, she calmly referenced specific recordings and transcripts. When they suggested her mental health issues compromised her reliability, she pointed to the documentation she had gathered, the corroborating testimony from other victims, and the financial records that proved Dr. Whitfield's conflicts of interest. Most importantly, she had learned to separate her trauma from her testimony. The defense wanted to make her break down on the stand, to appear emotional and unstable. Instead, Sarah remained calm, factual, and focused on the evidence rather than her personal feelings. Miss Chen, the defense attorney pressed during his final attempt to break her, do you really expect this jury to believe that the president of the medical board, a respected physician with decades of experience, orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against you simply because you filed a complaint? Sarah looked directly at the jury as she answered, I expect this jury to look at the evidence, the recorded conversations where Dr. Whitfield threatened me, the financial records showing her business relationships with companies that benefit from protecting certain physicians, the testimony from other patients who experienced identical retaliation, the fact that she illegally disclosed my private medical records to destroy my credibility. This isn't about what I expect people to believe. This is about what the evidence proves. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented recordings of Dr. Whitfield's threatening phone calls to Sarah. They showed financial documents proving her conflicts of interest. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the systematic pattern of corruption within the medical board. Most powerfully, they presented testimony from 8 other patients who had experienced similar retaliation after filing complaints against well-connected physicians. The stories were remarkably consistent. Confidentiality breaches, harassment campaigns, attempts to discredit complainants by questioning their mental health, and pressure to withdraw complaints to avoid further retaliation.
Dr. Janet Morrison, a former medical board investigator who had been forced out of her job for refusing to participate in cover-ups, provided devastating insider testimony about how cases were manipulated, evidence was suppressed, and legitimate complaints were buried to protect powerful physicians. Dr. Whitfield made it clear that certain physicians were untouchable, Dr. Morrison testified. She would review complaint files personally and instruct investigators to find procedural grounds for dismissal rather than conducting legitimate investigations. When investigators pushed back, they were transferred, demoted, or forced out entirely. The most damning evidence came from Dr. Whitfield's own communications. Prosecutors presented emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls that revealed the extent of her corruption and the callousness with which she treated patients who challenged her authority. In one particularly damaging recording, Dr. Whitfield could be heard telling a pharmaceutical executive, "Don't worry about the Morrison complaint. I'll make sure that troublemaker regrets ever filing it. By the time we're done with her, no one will believe anything she says." In another email exchange with a hospital administrator, she wrote, "These patients need to learn that there are consequences for attacking respected physicians. Sometimes destroying someone's credibility is the only way to send a message to other potential complainants." The trial lasted 6 weeks and generated national media attention.
Patient advocacy groups rallied around Sarah's case, organizing protests outside the courthouse and lobbying for stronger protections for medical complaint whistleblowers. Medical professionals were divided. Many supported Sarah and called for reform of the complaint system, arguing that Dr. Whitfield's corruption had damaged the credibility of legitimate medical oversight. Others rallied around Dr. Whitfield, arguing that the attacks on her represented a dangerous precedent that could undermine medical self-regulation. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning with their verdict. Dr. Whitfield was found guilty on 17 counts, including violation of federal privacy laws, conspiracy to obstruct justice, abuse of official authority, and perjury. The conviction carried a potential sentence of up to 25 years in federal prison. During the sentencing phase, Sarah was given the opportunity to address the court with a victim impact statement. She had prepared extensively for this moment, wanting to ensure that her words captured not just her own experience, but the broader implications of Dr. Whitfield's crimes. "Your Honor," Sarah began, standing at the podium in the packed courtroom, "Dr. Whitfield didn't just violate my privacy or obstruct justice in my individual case. She corrupted an entire system that was supposed to protect patients and ensure accountability in medical care." She paused, looking directly at Dr. Whitfield, who sat staring straight ahead without expression. "When I filed my complaint against Dr. Richards, I believed in the system. I thought that if I provided evidence of wrongdoing, it would be investigated fairly and appropriate action would be taken. Instead, I discovered that this system was designed to protect powerful physicians at the expense of vulnerable patients." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Dr. Whitfield used my own trauma against me, weaponizing my medical records and my healing process to destroy my credibility. She turned my search for justice into a public humiliation designed to warn other patients not to challenge medical authority." She gestured toward the gallery, where several other victims of medical board retaliation were seated. But she made a critical error. She underestimated the strength of survivors and the power of truth. "Every attempt to silence me only motivated me to speak louder. Every attack on my credibility only made me more determined to gather evidence. Every threat only convinced me that exposing this corruption was more important than protecting myself." Sarah looked back at the judge. "The message I want this sentencing to send is clear. Patients have rights, and those rights will be protected even when the people supposedly protecting them are corrupt. Medical professionals who abuse their power will be held accountable, no matter how powerful their connections or how sophisticated their retaliation tactics." She concluded by addressing the broader implications of the case. "This isn't just about punishing Dr. Whitfield for her crimes. This is about rebuilding trust in a system that failed. It's about ensuring that future patients can file complaints without fear of retaliation. It's about creating accountability mechanisms that actually work to protect the public rather than the powerful. The judge sentenced Dr. Whitfield to 18 years in federal prison, calling her crimes a betrayal of public trust that strikes at the heart of medical ethics and patient safety. The sentence was one of the harshest ever imposed on a medical regulatory official and sent shockwaves through medical communities nationwide. But the victory in criminal court was only the beginning of Sarah's broader fight for systemic reform. The evidence uncovered during Dr. Whitfield's trial had revealed corruption that extended far beyond one individual, encompassing entire networks of medical professionals, pharmaceutical companies, and healthcare institutions that had benefited from the protection racket. Sarah worked with Dr. Vasquez's office to pursue civil rights lawsuits against the medical board, the hospital systems that had participated, and the pharmaceutical companies that had apparently been paying for protection
In retaliation campaigns, and the pharmaceutical companies that had influenced complaint outcomes to protect their business interests. She also became a leading advocate for legislative reform, testifying before state and federal committees about the need for stronger protections for medical whistleblowers and more transparent oversight of medical regulatory bodies. The California legislature passed the Medical Accountability and Patient Protection Act, which Sarah had helped draft, creating independent oversight of medical board decisions, strengthening confidentiality protections for complainants, and establishing severe penalties for retaliation against patients who file legitimate complaints. The federal government followed with new regulations requiring medical board members to disclose all financial relationships with healthcare companies and recuse themselves from cases where conflicts of interest exist. 3 years after Dr. Whitfield's conviction, Sarah completed her master's degree in bioethics and accepted a position with the newly created Federal Office of Medical Oversight, an independent agency tasked with investigating corruption in medical regulatory systems nationwide. Her first assignment was to conduct a comprehensive review of medical board practices in 12 states where patterns similar to California's corruption had been identified. The work was challenging and often brought back painful memories of her own experience, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Sarah had discovered that her trauma, rather than being a weakness that disqualified her from credibility, was actually a source of strength that gave her unique insight into the failures of medical oversight systems. Her experience as a victim had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of institutional corruption and the sophisticated tactics used to silence complainants. On a warm spring morning, exactly 4 years after her collapse in Dr. Richards' office, Sarah stood before a Senate committee hearing room packed with patients, advocates, and medical professionals. She was there to present the findings of her federal investigation, which had uncovered corruption in medical boards across the country and would lead to the most comprehensive reform of medical oversight in American history. "Senators," she began, her voice clear and confident. 4 years ago, I was a graduate student who trusted the medical system completely. I believed that if I reported wrongdoing, it would be investigated fairly. I believed that patient confidentiality was sacred and protected. I believed that medical professionals always put patient welfare above their own interests. She paused, looking out at the audience where she could see other survivors of medical board retaliation, journalists who had covered corruption cases, and reformers who had worked tirelessly for change. I learned that those beliefs were naive, but not because they were wrong. They were naive because the systems we had in place to enforce those principles had been corrupted by people who put profits before patients, relationships before rights, and power before protection. Sarah outlined the findings of her investigation, detailing patterns of corruption in medical boards across the country, the systematic retaliation against complainants, and the financial conflicts of interest that had compromised medical oversight for decades. The good news is that corruption thrives in darkness and crumbles when exposed to light. The cases we've investigated, the evidence we've gathered, and the reforms we're proposing will create a new standard of accountability that puts patient protection at the center of medical regulation. She concluded her testimony by addressing the broader implications of the work. This isn't just about fixing broken systems.
This is about honoring the trust that patients place in medical professionals and ensuring that trust is never again betrayed for financial gain or personal advantage. After the hearing, as Sarah walked through the Capitol building surrounded by advocates and journalists, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment.
Sexual assault that had started it all still caused her pain, and she continued working with therapists to heal from both the original trauma and the institutional betrayal that followed. But she had also discovered something powerful in her struggle for justice. Her refusal to be silenced had not only held corrupt officials accountable, but had also inspired other survivors to speak out, other victims to seek justice, and other advocates to push for systemic reform. Dr. Richards had lost his medical license and faced civil liability for his privacy violations. The hospital system, where he had privileges, had implemented new confidentiality protections and oversight mechanisms. Sarah's parents had eventually reached out to reconcile, though their relationship remained complicated by the conflicts that had been exposed during her fight for justice. Most importantly, the systems that had failed Sarah and hundreds of other patients had been fundamentally reformed. Medical boards now operated under independent oversight, with transparent processes and strong protections for complainants. Patients who filed legitimate complaints no longer faced systematic retaliation, and medical professionals who violated ethical standards faced real consequences, regardless of their connections or influence. Sarah's apartment was now filled with letters from patients who had successfully challenged medical wrongdoing without facing retaliation, from medical students who had been inspired to pursue careers in healthcare ethics, and from advocates around the world who were working to implement similar reforms in their own countries. On her desk sat a framed copy of the first complaint she had filed against Dr. Richards, the document that had started her journey from victim to advocate to reformer. Next to it was a photo from the signing ceremony for the federal medical oversight reform legislation, where she stood surrounded by senators, patient advocates, and medical professionals who had worked together to create a new standard of accountability. But the item she treasured most was a handwritten note from Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had become both a colleague and a friend during the long fight for justice. The note simply read, "Sarah, you turned your pain into power and your trauma into transformation. Thank you for refusing to be silenced and for making the world safer for every patient who comes after you." As Sarah prepared for her next assignment investigating medical board corruption in the southeastern states, she thought about the words she had spoken at Dr. Whitfield's sentencing. She had promised that the case would send a message about accountability and patient rights, and that promise had been kept. But more than that, she had discovered that survivors of institutional betrayal had a unique power to create change. Their experience with corruption made them experts in recognizing it. Their trauma gave them the motivation to fight for justice that others might lack. Their journey from victim to advocate provided hope for other survivors and inspiration for reformers. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from another patient who had been retaliated against for filing a medical complaint, asking for advice about pursuing justice. She smiled as she typed her response. "Document everything. Find allies who believe in accountability and remember that their attempts to silence you are proof that your voice is powerful. Truth has a way of prevailing, even when it takes time." She had learned that fighting institutional corruption was not a single battle, but an ongoing campaign that required persistence, courage, and the willingness to transform personal trauma into public advocacy. The victory against Dr. Whitfield and the medical board was significant, but it was just one step in a larger movement to ensure that powerful institutions truly served the people they were supposed to protect.
Doctor's office, betrayed by the very system she trusted to heal her, had become a force for systemic change that would protect countless other patients from similar betrayal.
The medical board president, who had tried to destroy her credibility by weaponizing her trauma, had instead created an advocate whose expertise in corruption would expose similar patterns of abuse across the country. The attempt to silence her had amplified her voice, and the effort to discredit her had established her as one of the nation's leading experts on medical oversight reform. Sarah's story had become proof that institutional corruption, no matter how sophisticated or well-connected, could not ultimately prevail against the determination of survivors who refused to be silenced and the power of truth to create lasting change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.